free content for the coach, by the coach, raising the bar every week. Speed for Your Mind podcast is sponsored by Powerlift Equipment. High quality equipment, unique design, and multifunctional training capabilities. Powerlift are innovators for the strength and conditioning field. Hey everybody, this is Zach Howell, Strength Coach Select. This is episode number 17 of the Speed for Your Mind podcast. Today on the show we have Bob Alejo. He formerly was at NC State for such a long period of time. Tell me how many years, Coach?
Six, seven, something like that.
Where were you at before that?
Oh, shoot. It's going to take a while now.
Well, Bob and Ron, all right, let me finish the intro first. I'll finish the intro first.
Okay.
Now he's currently Director of Sports Science at Powerlift. So, Bob, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you've been, what you've done, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I'm going to have to give you like the abridged portion of that because, after 35 years, although I will say that I've only had 5 jobs now I think about it. So my first job was at UCLA, coached there for 10 years. And from UCLA in 93, I went to Major League Baseball. So I was in the big leagues, first strength coach in Oakland A's history for 9 years. Then I took off to the Yankees for almost 4 years with Jason Giambi, worked personally with him under his business, but I also spent some time and wrote a book with Dr. Jose Antonio on the called Double Play, Nutrition and Training for Baseball. Started a website, so I was interested to do my own thing for a few years. Then I jumped out of that, went to UC Santa Barbara, was the director of strength and conditioning there for almost 4 years, and then Billy Beane called me back to the A's. I accepted the job, so I went back to the Oakland A's. And in the third year of my contract there, after about probably 30-something odd games or so, I decided to accept the position as Director of Strength and Conditioning for NC State. And so that's kind of a quick summary of where I've been. So I haven't been a lot of places, fortunately, and most of those places were my call. But as things happen in this business, my contract didn't get renewed this last July, and so really fortunate enough to come on as a director of sports science for Powerlift, and also doing a couple other things. I'm writing for SimplyFaster.com and doing some consulting in other areas. So, in between all that, I was a member of 2 Olympic teams in London and Beijing. And as the strength coach for the men's beach volleyball tandem of Todd Rogers and Phil Dalhausser. Came up gold one time. We won the gold medal in Beijing, and then didn't do so well in London. Still, both times, I think, ranked number 1 in the world. Things just happen,
Oh, yeah.
Wrote some books, did some things, lots of lectures. I mean, that's like the quickest possible way to give you the summary. But it's been a great career, and I'm hoping now I'm in a position to help others benefit and enjoy some of the same instances and experiences that I've had.
All right. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, so you've been, like you say, you haven't had a lot of jobs, but I mean, you've been around, right? I mean, you've been doing it for a long time. So tell us a little bit about, what it's like to be, in those positions, to change from doing X to doing Y to going back to X, right, to doing Y, and how to handle that as a coach, right? Because it's different. It's tough. I think that everybody's first 6 to 8 months at a new job, they kind of go like through a phase, right? We're like, I really miss my old job. Oh, I really like it here. Oh man, I hate these people. Oh man, I really like it. Oh man, I really like it here. So, I mean, what tell us about the transitions. Tell us about how you've handled going from spot to spot and how you're handling a role that you're in now, which is unlike you had in the past.
I'm a little bit like the gingerbread man, right? I mean, for 35 years they couldn't catch me, and then after that they got me. So, I think what I'm trying to say is, the transitions for me were all my choices. I had jobs every time I went to go do another job, but switching jobs was my choice. So I was prepared for that. Sometimes, as it happens in our profession, you don't get renewed, or you're at will or whatever, and boom, you're forced to go somewhere else, go live somewhere else. I've never really had to do that. And in fact, even after this last job at NC State, I didn't have to move, so I'm able to stay still in my home. So I'm, very fortunate there. And as far as I hate these people and all that, I've been really lucky to not have to say that. I don't want to say ever, but I mean it's so few that the moment was either fleeting or not at all. I mean, look, the Oakland A's are a perfect example. I had the best job in baseball twice. The job at UCLA, 25 national championships in 10 years. I mean, that was fantastic to be involved with that. To go to UC Santa Barbara probably was the 4 most rewarding years of my career. Probably not the 4 most rewarded in terms of rings and watches, but what I got out of that was a tremendous gift from that school and those kids. NC State was certainly rewarding. When I came aboard, I think we were somewhere around in the 80s in the Directors' Cup. When I left, we were in the top 20, and within months now, I think they're even higher than that. So, all of them had their certain rewards. And I think, when you were talking about that, kind of recapping the transition, I think the huge benefit for me was at UCLA, now this is in the 80s now, perhaps before you were born, that I was the first, and I had a lot of firsts, of course, but that happens when you're at the beginning of something. So I was the first assistant strength coach in UCLA history in 1984. But there was only probably 2 coaches everywhere in the country, if not only one. I'm talking about Alabama, Florida State, Penn State, you name it. There probably was only 1 full-time for sure, maybe 2 full-time. But it was really, the beginning of the profession. But the benefit of that was, which I think is a detriment now to many coaches, is that, essentially, you're either the head coach for half the sports or assist on the other half. So I was involved really with all, I think 22 or 23 teams at the time.
Right.
So the fact that I was able to do all that gave me great confidence, specifically because UCLA were winners in nearly every sport. So I got to see what the best players in the country did. And so it gave me great confidence to move on to the next thing. Now, my next step was baseball. Well, I played baseball through college and was fairly successful. Division II baseball player. So to go from UCLA, where I had baseball, to the big leagues wasn't a big jump for me. I just went and did my job. I mean, I think part of the virtue of me moving to these different areas and different levels, and essentially staying at the elite level most of my career, is because I didn't look at it like I had to reinvent anything. I just went in and did my job. I just took it like, like you should do. What does this athlete need to be good? And that's how we write programs, right? Everything's based on need. I didn't look at it. What does this $1 million athlete who's on TV every day need? I think if you do that, there's a good chance that you'd start getting a little bit nervous.
Right.
So the transitions for me were really natural. I mean, they were natural, number one, and 2, they were my choice. So I think it takes off any hesitation. Like you say, you apply for a job, and these days, it's not unlikely that you know somebody to get that interview and get there. Mm-hmm. But that's maybe 1 or 2 people, and you have to work with the people in finance, the people that run the fields, and everybody else involved. So there is that uncomfortability. Like, what do I do? So I call it the tap dance. I mean, you're out there tap dancing for 6 to 8 months before you can really settle in and be you.
Right.
And I've never really had those instances. Again, my circumstances were a bit unique. And even now in powerlift, most of the guys in powerlift I've known for 20 years. So none of this has been a reach either. And this thing kind of keeps going on, goes on and start just making these connections throughout the industry. So But what you're saying is true. You get to places you're uncomfortable and you're trying to figure it out. And I think the transitions are more related to moving perhaps when you're not ready to or don't want to, but have to.
Right. Yeah, I think let's talk about that for a second, right? So I think a lot of people don't understand how hard it is to get a job, right? Hey,
Yeah.
let's talk about that for a second. So I think a lot
You got a
of
smile on your face or something happening right in your brain right now. You're cranking, dude. You're grinding.
I just think that there's a big misconception, and that's my honest opinion. I just think that okay, now I have not been doing this nearly as long as you have, right? And I'm not even close. And I will never. One thing that I've always looked at and said, I'm never going to say ever that I know everything or I know how things operate or this that. But I will say I just think that I've had interns in the past 5 years where they've worked for you for 6 months and now they expect to go get a full-time job, and or just simple things like that. And I think that I mean, let's talk about how hard it is to get a job, right? I mean, how many phone calls have to be made on the back end? How many how many connections that you have to have just to be able to get your foot in the door,
Right.
And then once you actually do get here, the preparation as to what you can do when you're actually on the interview to be able to get that job. Because I think a lot of people don't think those things through. You know what I mean?
There's no question about that.
So talk about that a little bit. Like, what if you were gonna talk to a 22-year-old, wide-eyed, like this is what we're gonna have to do to get you a job a year from now, or 2 years from now, and what are you gonna say to them? Like, what are your expectations? What should they expect?
You've got to prepare for your next job right now, even though it's not on the horizon, right? I got asked this question on a podcast yesterday, actually. Jake Schuster out of Florida State runs a podcast, and he was saying, what should we do now to position ourselves? And I say, start positioning yourself now. You don't want to have to, believe me, you don't want to have to sit there and prepare for an interview by creating documents. You just don't have time for that. What you should be doing is pulling those documents out already that you've already finished, changing the titles perhaps for the interview. But it's got to be done, bro. It's already got to be done. And here's why. Give an example. I was at the winter meetings for Major League Baseball, and some of you know I've written for SimplyFaster.com, and I wrote an article called "Manage Your Weight Room Like a Business," because it is. And a couple other things like that, and other things I've been outspoken about putting our profession a little bit up here instead of keeping it down here. And they said to me, "Hey, coach, I'd like you to help me out with some of these things and get me set up and prepared, because I think they're going to hire somebody over the top of me. They're going to hire a director or something, supervisor." To which my response was, "That should be you. You should be applying for that job, and you should already have your stuff ready." In other words, when these jobs pop up, Zach, you don't want to say, "Hey, I know I can do that job. Here's what I would do." Your answer should be, "I know I can do that job. Here's what I've done." Pull your list out, all those things that you need to do. The management skills, your management plan, right? So, number one, you should be planning now. Like somebody was talking about, think about this. When's the last time you heard or named 10 or 15 guys who have retired as strength and conditioning coaches? Like you just said, "Hey, I'm done now. It's all good. I'm going to now retire." You're not going to retire me. I'm going to retire because I've got what I need. I'm set. I can't think of any off the top of my head, including me, right? I'm not done quite yet, but I didn't decide to leave NC State. They decided that for me. Well, my point is, somebody says, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, if you are planning to retire as a strength and conditioning director or coach, then plan it. Plan to retire. Fix things up so you can get to a spot where you'll have enough money, you'll be comfortable, you've accomplished the things in your career. I mean, you can do that. You can set that up. So that's the beginning of it, right? And that is planning for your next job, your job interview. What's next? So number one, you got to network. Your name has to be a household item, much like you and I talked about this podcast. It's got to be out there. It's got to be like a commercial, right? And we've seen people do that in our industry. A lot of self-serving stuff there, but there's also a lot of people who are doing that because they have something to say that's valuable and beneficial for all of us, right? And that's what we want. But you need to start networking. Your name's got to be common. I mean, think about it. Years ago, that couple that crashed the White House, they got in, they went to some party at the White House, his husband and wife, and they were scammers, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you'd have to look that up, right? So it was about 10 years ago, whatever it was. But so they're it is long. I'm going to say, hold on a second, I'll think about this. 2006 or 7, something about 10 years. They got into a White House party. And so how do you think they did that? Because somehow they worked and got their name out there enough that when they went up to the front door and, went up to Zach and said, hey, I need to go in. Well, you don't have to go. Well, Zach was telling me about this. Oh, Zach? Yeah, okay, come on in, right? So they did enough to where that name was common. That's what we need to do. That's what, these days, that's what Twitter's for, Instagram, Facebook, in a good way. And also, too, get involved with the people that are in our business. One thing I did at State was during basketball season, the team that I was in charge of, men's basketball. Any visiting coach that came in, I offered them to come over to my gym, which wasn't far from where they were staying, have some coffee and sit and talk shop or talk about anything you want. But I'd invite my staff in. So now I said, we'll come and pick you up, take you to shoot around. I'll come get you myself. We'll bring you back to the office for an hour or so. So now I'll get some coffee and have you back at the hotel and ready to go for the game tonight. But, it's just one other way to extend yourself out there and let people know you. So, you're right about the job. When people say, well, it's who you know these days. Well, no kidding. I'm not going to hire somebody I don't know. I mean, unless this guy's absolutely extraordinary, which is not going to be typical, right?
Right.
It may be somebody you've not met but know about. So one thing I've done is I've met coaches now that I've known about forever, and they've known me, but I've never shaken their hands or looked in their eyes. Ken Manny comes to mind, Michigan State. He'll be there almost 40 years now, right? And I've known him, and he's known me, but I've never shaken his hand and looked him in the eye. Finally, I've done that. But that didn't mean I didn't know him. The other part of getting known and making that job easy to get is be good. I mean, granted, not every job hire is a guy qualified for the position. Not every guy that's going to get hired is more qualified than you, right? It just happens. But if you're good, the likelihood of you getting that job is a lot better than if you're just somebody that talks about what you do and really there's no substance to it. You haven't won anything, you haven't done anything, you haven't wrote anything, you haven't spoke anywhere. Get out and do that, so that you have got accomplishments. I just wrote an article on Twitter, battles and all these things. And my point was, what happens when you get into a battle and it finally comes down to, well, who have you coached? Well, at some point, that's not such a bad argument. Right. So, don't tell me how to train professional pitchers when I've been there all the time and you have 6 pitchers at your private facility. That's not the same.
No, I don't
when you tell me, hey, you should be doing this and that and the other thing, I'm telling you, you're wrong, and here's why. And now I got this whole bunch of information and results that tell you otherwise. So, be good. Be good at what you do. And, back in the day, when in the 80s, we had no computers and no cell phones. Yet we knew who was good at getting it done out there. And frankly, we didn't know who was crappy. We never talked about it because who wants to talk about somebody being crappy? We sure in the hell knew who was really good then. And that was one way or another. That word traveled fast.
Right.
So I think that's the way. But to your point, yeah, getting the job's hard. I got, dozens and dozens of resumes for the jobs that I posted. And, for my interns and all that. And what I tell them is this thing's a process. And there's certainly a skill at applying for a job. You can't just get online and drop a resume down and say, oh, hey, coach, I applied for this job. That means nothing to me. I say you apply online, then you send that same group of information, your resume and your cover letter, to the coach that's going to be there. Mm-hmm. And then a couple, 3 days later, you call them and say, hey, coach, just want to make sure you got my stuff. Want to see where everything is right now. But just dropping a resume online, that's fruitless to me. You might as well not really might not apply at all.
Yeah, I think my other point to that is readiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about it.
Yes, sir.
I run into this issue all the time too. Is like I'll say to someone that's working for me, I'll say, hey, there's this job, it's up in Upland wherever, and I'm gonna need your resume so I can send it up there, and you should send the resume up there too.
Mm-hmm.
That should happen in my eyes, the way I've always done it, the way I was taught. That should happen in an hour, maybe two, before the end of the day.
Yeah.
Before the end of the day, no matter what, right?
Right.
I think like there's a lot of people that number one, don't have their resume put together that's ready to go right now, and number two, I think that it's not a time sensitive thing, because I know that I've hired between my last 4 jobs, I've hired 5 people, full time, this, that, and the other thing, and I can tell you that it was always the first 5.
Oh.
The first 5 that I got phone calls about from people that I respected, that I gave the most thought into. Now, did I hire the first 5? No, not all the time. But but if I got a phone call from a few people that I really respected, and those kids got their stuff into me quick, I've always given them a lot more consideration than the ones that took a week and a half to get their stuff in.
Right.
No,
you said 2 things that were really important right there. One, you said prepared. If you've got to sit down and say, "Oh, here, let me get my stuff together," then you're not ready. You're not ready to get into it. You should have a cover letter kind of set up already, so that it's kind of the same sort of content for every job, but just enough room to be able to add something about I talked to Zach at UCF. He mentioned it was necessary to come into your school. I understand it's your first year. Something personal about it.
Yeah, and then just swap the names out. And I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, it's
right. No, you're right. And the other part was, there was a job open at Princeton, who I knew the strength coach out there, and he called back to my guy and said, he wasn't qualified one way or another. So I called him back and said, hey, listen, do me a favor, Jason. Can you talk to my guy and just explain to him what that all means? I think it'd be good information for him to know. It was an intern. And I said, here's the things I'm talking about, like calling the guy back. Well, he said he ended up getting I don't want to say he said 50 to 75 resumes for this job. My intern was the only guy that called him out of the 75. Everything else was just an email, hey, I'm going to apply for you.
Right.
And that's why he got looked at, even though he wasn't. So these things make a difference, right? They make a difference. And there's a trick to that, like you say. And here's the other part, too. If you think, well, I don't know if I want to bother the guy, if I call him and all that. Here's my response to that. If you applied for a job and the guy is bothered because you're showing enthusiasm and passion for wanting to be added to his staff, then you don't want to be there anymore. Right. I don't get bothered by people saying, hey, I'd love to coach at your place, love to work with you. I don't get bothered.
Yeah, I've always found a lot better results being annoying as hell rather than being completely silent. That's just that's just my outlook on it. So talk to us about, you and I talked a little bit before we started about what you're doing right now to better the field, to work with the NCAA, to be able to put content out. Talk about all the things that you're doing. I mean, this podcast, right? I mean, it's like, and like you said earlier, we talked about putting yourself out there and putting your information out there and putting content out. Like I always see Alejo stuff out there. It's every day, it's every week. Talk about what you're doing and kind of the mindset you bring to doing that.
Well, I certainly got time to post information. That's the good news. I would say, well, I got a couple of things going right now. So as a director of sports science for PowerLift, I'm basically talking about the science of sports and athletics, just talking about what I've done, I talked to Zach, and I was at the NFL Combine, and I talked to so-and-so. It was great, I want to promote people within the profession. we spend so much time saying this guy's terrible and that guy's terrible and that's useless. I mean, that doesn't do any good. I mean, let's talk about what's good, right? So we can spend some time talking about what's good. And then the other thing I do is I've started the Sports Science Educational Board of 9 of the top researchers in our field, and it's really a good list. And you guys out there, follow me at Coach underscore Alejo on Twitter, and you'll see it on Facebook too. But this is a group of guys that are going to be educational. I didn't want to call it advisory board because we weren't advising us. This is an educational board, something for you to call in and say, hey, here's a question, or for me to say on Twitter as I get into a debate, well, here's what I know, but what do you think? So and so and so and so, and then list our guys out there. So that's the other thing. The other piece of getting out the good word in education is trying to get us a better spot on the performance ladder, right? And so part of that has to be raising the level of our input and our status in the profession, and that's got to be really important because we talk about certification and all these other things, and frankly, it's not our problem is not certification, and I'll tell you why. Think about MDs, ATCs, PTs, CPAs. They're all certified, but those certifications don't mean that they know every single thing about their profession and they're really good at it. None of those things. And I know. We know every one of the persons, at least in the performance area, who have those credentials that we wouldn't go to if we didn't have to. Right?
Right. Yeah.
So same thing with strength coaches. Well, certification doesn't mean anything. Well, that's not true. It does. It means that you look at it. It means you understand the minimal amount of knowledge to handle a program, right? It never says that once you get certified, you know everything there is to know about strength and conditioning, and you're going to be a great coach from here on. It never says that. And again, that depends on the practitioner, just like it does with any profession, right? Mm-hmm. Problem is we need to get up into the administration. We need to be associate athletic directors, not assistant athletic director, but associate, somebody who has some impact. Somebody who has the ear of the athletic director, who has a direct reporting line to them, not somebody that we have to tell, and then they tell somebody, and then they tell the athletic director. That's a waste of time, and certainly shows how much they really care about us.
Right.
And we should be assistant general managers, somebody who has the general manager's ear or the owner's ear. Well, think about it collegiately. Why wouldn't an athletic director want to directly talk to the person whose staff has direct contact with every single athlete in the department 2 to 5 times a week? Nobody else in athletics does that. Nobody. Right. The trainer doesn't see every single kid every 5 times a week. The nutritionist doesn't. Academics doesn't. Not the same person. But the person that works with women's volleyball and men's tennis, they work with that kid 2 to 3 times a week, every single person on that team. So why wouldn't somebody want to know about that? Well, they would. Makes sense. Unfortunately, that position, God bless them, at the same time, not only do they handle strength and conditioning, but they handle athletic training, the supervisor, right? Athletic training,
right?
Sports nutrition, sports psychology, sports science in some places, student affairs, and they may handle 2 or 3 other sports, depending on the size of the school. So by the time they get down to strength and conditioning, it just doesn't make the docket that day when they walk into the office. Or, they don't really know what we do. They can't really describe and feel what we feel because they don't understand what we do. When we talk about certification, I have to go get a certification to do my job. It would make sense somehow if the person supervising me was either certified or had something that said they knew what I was doing. Mm-hmm. Because then they could really relay the message much better. For example, if I was the associate athletic director at UCF, when you came to me and said, Coach, or Mr. Alejo, Bob, whatever, I need more equipment, I need more people, I need less time, more time, whatever, I would know what you mean. I could look at that and say, I can tell you that directly impacts the health and safety of our kids. And I think that position shouldn't look at anything else. I mean, they should have more responsibility than every kid in the department? I think that's enough. Why water it down? But my push right now is to get a hold of John Parsons at the NC2A and talk to Bob Bowlesby, which I have. Talk to Mary Wilford at the NC2A. You know, these people are on the Safeguards Committee. Talk to them, because right now the Safeguard Committee has one strength and conditioning coach. One. They have some athletic trainers on there, which is good. But then you're talking about administrators that don't know what we do on a daily basis. They wouldn't be able to, you know, it seems odd that in the 20-something odd people on the Safeguards Committee that there's one strength and conditioning coach talking about the health and safety of athletes. I don't frankly understand that ratio. And so when you talk about that, then you also go to football, where some of these, you know, serious accidents are happening, some catastrophic. A couple of years ago at the football safety meeting that the NC2A held in 2016, of the 70 people invited to that, there was 0 strength coaches. 0. Yet that's the name that pops up when we see these horrific incidents happening in football strength and conditioning, right? And listen, I'm not saying we're not culpable to some degree there, but there's more than one layer involved with those accidents. Absolutely. More than one layer. Mm-hmm. And if you can say what you want, but it always seems to be those things that we talk about in places that are, you know, off the beaten path, not part of the meeting. For that to stop, it's got to be part of the meeting.
Right.
And so I have the time and the energy and certainly the passion to talk about that. There's no reason for that to happen. No reason. I mean, absolutely, we know for sure that, like in some instances, heat illness in the summertime, right? It's 100% preventable. 100%.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about here? You know, when that happens, who's supervising that? And who's supervising them? Who's supervising that? Who allows that to happen? Who allows that hire to happen? Oversight's a big deal. And Bob Bowlesby, who I've talked to, who was talking about it at the Big 12 media day in September, said, you know, the NC2A is going to take a good look at the hiring, supervising, and the oversight of those positions. And they should. I'm all for that. Some strength coaches are like, oh, that's a bunch of crap that, you know, that we shouldn't be doing that. I say, that's good for us to have somebody up there talk like that. Now we just got to see if the NC2A will come through with it. I know Bob Bowlesby did. So far, I'm not convinced that the NC2A has taken any measures in that area for us.
Yeah, that's, man, is that such an interesting topic, because it's, you know, you and I talked about before, it's tough for those at the collegiate level to kind of really dive into it too much, you know, just because of, you know, the repercussions that come along with it sometimes, and that sucks, right? And it's you know, it's awful, but at the same time, you kind of, like, from an outside perspective, you know, you understand it, and, you know, it's just kind of the way it is a little bit, which is sad to say, but
sad, very sad. So, it's difficult conversations that have to be had. I mean, you can't tap dance around that. There's no way.
Yeah.
You know, no way.
No. My last thing for you today. One piece of advice. One piece of advice for coaches, for, you know, for young aspiring ones to ones that have been doing it for 30 plus years. You got one thing to help them today. What do you got?
Oh, God, you know, there's more than one thing for sure. I would say of all the things, I think that the biggest thing is to network, you know, ask around to see what other people are doing. And that will cover the education part, you know, keep growing. That would cover the job hunting part. You know, you'll have more people in line to know. Get you used to speaking to people, asking good questions, you know, and it'll grow the fraternity, you know. I mean, I'd like to think coaches are still talking to each other about methods and training and all that. I think that's important. I will say this, too, in addition. I know you said one, but I'm going to say two. You know, you got to follow the science and the data a little bit. Not that you have to just dive on it and just be numbers strictly, right? But you have to follow that a little bit, because there's some practicality to it and data. And so if you're ever going to support yourself about what your methods are and your actions are, training-wise, it's tough for you to not show the evidence. Like, so when you say, "Oh, I think it works," or "I feel," or I mean, there's no reason for that these days. You have tons of data. In the era of big data, we have way more ways to collect that data and have it way more accurate than it was before. Do that, so when you start talking about what you're doing, you can say, "This is it," and it's educational for me. If you're going to offer something that makes sense and it's better than what I'm doing, I want you to tell me that, because our job is not for me to get, to grow, my brand. My job is to get these kids to run faster and jump higher. If you got something that does that, then I need to hear it. So, but I'm not going to just do it because you say so, and I'm not going to do it because your team won a championship either. That's not enough evidence. So I gave you 2. Sorry.
No, that's great, man. That's good info. So I appreciate you coming on the show today, Coach.
Zach, it was a pleasure. Thanks. You guys keep following Zach. Watch him. He's going to start blowing up on social media, and we're going to need it because we want to get the good word out about what we're doing here.
All right, Coach. I appreciate you. Have a great day.
Yes, sir.